Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Just give a few minutes for people to come in. While we're waiting, I'll just give a quick introduction. For those who don't know us, we are Darrow AI. We're a legal intelligence company. We're based in Tel Aviv and New York, and we help plaintiffs find violations and attorneys to detect them. And we basically litigate impactful cases in a number of different practice areas. Today, as you know, the focus is going to be on a toxic tort, which is PFAS. And just a quick intro about myself. I'm Serge. I'm the director of Mass Tort here and working on different Mass Torts that we're involved in. Meori's here as well. Maybe you want to give a quick intro about yourself.
So I'm Meori. I lead the environmental protection team at Darrow. We have a team of engineers, environmental engineers, and lawyers with expertise in environmental law. And we basically uncover environmental contamination cases as well as greenwashing cases and bring them to light.
Yeah, well, thanks everyone for joining us today. And today really it's going to just be a conversation about PFAS and about the litigation, the landscape, and the trends that we're seeing. And just for those who don't know, by way of background, the PFAS litigation is something that's been going on for a while. And I don't know, Miori, do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, so PFAS has actually been around for quite a few a few decades now. But I think what's really interesting about PFAS litigation, it's not the chemical itself. It's the story behind what brought it to light and what made the litigation happen. So it's not really about the chemicals. I think it's more about how modern data tools, and we're talking about analytical tools, geodata tools, procedural tools, brought this contaminant and made it into the largest environmental case in history, in US history. So these chemicals have been around in our water, in our soil, in our bloodstreams for years, and it's been building up in everyone's bodies. Um, but now we're able to detect it, which really makes this case, all these cases unprecedented.
Right.
So we have, modern lab instruments, we have monitoring programs nationwide that, really make all this data publicly available about, where the stuff is being emitted, where it's found. And that has been really, really helpful in, bringing these cases to light. So with this technology, we were able to understand the scale of the contamination here. And I think this really started with the initial DuPont cases that we saw quite a few years ago. And that was, I think, the first time that using data and using research, we were really able to understand the health impacts of this stuff. Those were facilities that were directly releasing PFAS into water sources. And for the first time, it was made just public knowledge. And that really drove not only, massive media attention on how serious this problem is, but also it really drove regulators to act. So it surfaced all that data, everyone's talking about it, and eventually that led to what we all know, the big MDL involving the firefighting foam. So just for context again, um, the firefighting foam in this MDL basically was used nationwide in many types of facilities, mostly, I mean, most extensively, I think, in military facilities, fire stations, anywhere where you would need to use this quite a lot. And this product has quite a significant amount of PFAS in it. Once that was, spread out and used, applied on the ground, it seeped really through the ground and made its way to water sources. Um, and so, when by the time, the information and everything that was out there had matured to that point, when we got to these AFFF cases, we already had capabilities to really analyze these huge data sets about the water emissions, about contamination levels in water sources. We could use GIS tools to sort of map out these plumes around, especially around the military bases. And the tech also really helped, really run this MDL because of the scale of it. And maybe, Serge,
Right.
you can weigh a little in about how that has changed the game for law firms.
Yeah, it's changed, right. It's exactly like you said. It changed the game for how law firms operate in the environmental domain, and it just really changed how, the tech changed how the MDL itself, the multi-district litigation, how that works, right? Because when with this PFAS, with all these claims nationwide, there was no choice but to use data to identify where the contaminated water was, and match them to the, as you mentioned, those AFFF sites, and to locate victims who, again, these victims might not even know that they have claims, right? They might have kidney cancer or something else, and they have no idea that it's caused by the water that they're using, right? And then to add to that, there's the AFFF contamination, but then there's other defendants, others in this MDL that also caused contamination. And so you have to almost differentiate between the different polluters. And it's especially difficult because the injuries are often very similar, right? So, and then the tech that we have today, it doesn't just prove the contamination. And I mean, of course it does, because it allows us to tell where the contamination is happening and to look at data in a way that analyzes all of it. But it also allows us to form an MDL where like thousands of cases are being brought, and there's millions of documents here, right? And the only way to really make this work is to have like a centralized database where you have data that is standardized, and you're using all the latest e-discovery tools. And the courts also have to be involved. They have to have a system to manage all this, so that you can do the bellwether cases, and really build the settlement models, right? Because another element is that different people have different injuries, right? So it's not like everyone has cancer. Some people just have a minor injury. Some people have, maybe it's a nuisance value, or some sort of their property was affected. And then in some cases, God forbid, someone dies. So you have to really, in the MDL, account for who's the defendant, how do you deal with all this data, and then how do you account for the different injuries between plaintiffs.
Yeah, and I think, what's really challenging with these environmental contamination cases, maybe, toxic torts in general, is the causation aspect, as everyone probably knows.
Right.
Um, and here, when you're looking at people with such different types of damages, but not only that, you're looking at people who have completely different stories. So it's all a matter, you could have one person who's drinking the water, another person who's only showering with it, and their whole exposure story varies. And here, I think that's where the fact sheets really came in and helped, make sense of this. Honestly, a mess. Like it's huge. Um, that has been really crucial. So through the fact sheets, courts were able to understand step by step, break down the story of each of these plaintiffs that came in, and fit them in the right bucket of damages.
Right.
That's been really helpful, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think because, in other torts, I think before PFAS, I think more of the PFS forms, like the plaintiff fact sheets, had very similar claims and similar injuries. And here there's thousands of these claims that are all coordinated in one form, but they're very different, right? The injuries are different. The place of exposure is different. The amount of exposure is different. So I think it really, the technology that we have today almost allows us to look at this in like layers, right? So it's like we have the layer one of like, where is the PFAS contamination, right? Which zip codes, and then another layer that we see is like where people lived and how they were impacted. Another layer is like the injuries that were there, and there's a lot of other ones, and I think by like really pooling all this data and the corporate records and the exposure histories, we're able to form like a really good picture of what is happening with each person, so that we can, as I mentioned before, like allocate the amount of responsibility for to defend, and also to give the right value to the plaintiff for their potential settlement. And I think this tech has these tech advancements have enabled a lot of these major settlements to happen, and for us to bring these claims against whether it's 3M or DuPont. And it also, this MDL is really the first time that courts are working in this kind of scale, right? Where it's just tens of thousands of claims from different polluters, and assigning liability to different ones. And yeah, I think the fact sheets, they capture a lot of really important information, like what are the contamination levels, what are the sources, the damage costs, and then it all has to be structured into analyzed data basically like structured in a way that's consistent. And then that way allows the leadership of the M to identify the right cases and to create like a model for the tiering and also to prioritize the people that have the highest exposure. I think that's without these fact sheets, it would be really challenging, almost impossible to manage these claims, right?
Yeah, I mean, you spoke about the layers and how, the first layer is really finding out the locations of the contamination. I think an interesting point here is, this whole process and the tech that was incorporated in it was not only efficient for courts, but also for the law firms involved. I mean, so with the first layer of, the geolocation and where these people are likely to have been affected, law firms could more efficiently, target advertising, reach the right people, and then using the data that they're collecting throughout the process, they can really filter out people who, differentiate between people who fit in this AFFF MDL and people who would have been affected, maybe their damages were caused by other things. Sometimes, people are affected by PFAS where the source isn't necessarily AFFF. And I think that's, you know, become like a more of a, it's on the sidelines today because the main discussion is around this huge MDL. But, the PFAS contamination out there, the kind of like the C8 cases that we initially discussed, those are still out there. And we're seeing contamination still coming directly from facilities, even if we're not talking about, things where the source was this firefighting foam. And I think that's one of the challenges moving forward today. But maybe, Serge, you can tell us a little bit about, where this case stands today. Where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And that's a really good point because there's the AFFF MDL, and then there's all the other contamination that happened, and it's not necessarily the same contamination, the same defendants, but it's the same injury sometimes. So, like you said, the MDL is really focused on the AFFF cases, and by now, like thousands have been filed. There's actually some court deadlines towards the end of this year to file the cases and also submit the PFS forms, but it's a little bit unusual. The cases were filed before all the PFS forms were completed. And right now we're seeing thousands, tens of thousands of claims. And a lot of the firms involved are right now in the validation process for the claimants, right? So they're looking to see like, do you have the driver's license? So can you prove your address? Can you show where you lived? And not only where you lived, but what the contamination level was at the time that you lived there, how many years you lived there. And it's challenging, right? Because not everyone remembers their old address or can even prove it. So and then beyond that, you have to also prove your injury, right? Like you have to have a diagnosis and you have to have a medical record that proves the diagnosis. So you have these law firms that are now trying to collect this information from the plaintiffs. And of course, it's challenging, right? You have to contact them and ask them for this, and they might not have it available, but they have obviously the claim and the injury. So you have to try to push that through. So it involves a lot of follow up and technology, and right now we're in the midst of that. So hopefully within the next month, this time in December, we'll figure that out.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it raises challenges, for the plaintiff's attorneys to deal with such scale, but they're handling it. Yeah, it's definitely a new
Yeah, I mean,
process.
imagine if they had to do this, in separate cases. It's
It would be
unimaginable.
impossible. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's why the MDL format is like makes this possible. But yeah, I mean, these people have valid claims, but because it's at such scale, it actually, it's impossible to bring individual ones.
Yeah. I think that's what's really fascinating with this case and with, just the scale.
And
It's
yeah,
so impressive.
and I'm
And
wondering,
I
like,
think,
what was sorry?
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say like what you think like when PFAS shows up in like the water like how do we figure out like where it came from like I to the extent that like we have the technology but like how does that actually work?
Yeah, so funnily enough, like I've been going on about the advantages of technology and the publicly available data out there about environmental contamination, but with PFAS, because there's so much data out there and the contamination is so extensive, that's actually a major challenge. Here, I mean, just the abundance of data is really the challenge,
Right.
but it's definitely possible. we're able, I have a team of engineers and lawyers who work on these cases, and we're really able to use big data and our proprietary AI capabilities to sort of analyze, make sense of these millions of data points, to try to connect, when we find an area of contamination, connect that to a source. So when we look at these cases, and it doesn't have to necessarily be PFAS, all of our contamination cases, we kind of break it down into three elements. So the first will be the contamination source. That'll be based on emissions data, a lot of self-reporting, but not necessarily
Right.
just self-reporting. So we'll look at, essentially what's coming out of these facilities. Then the next point would be understanding where that contamination has reached. So we're going to be looking at monitoring data, sampling data, whether it's air, whether it's water, and then we'll try to sort of map, based on how we know that contaminant behaves, and based on, external factors like topography, like elevation, things like that. We'll try to map, where and how that contamination plume sort of behaved. And then the third element in this story would be the damage. And in most of our cases, we're able to connect those three elements. So we'll find the source and we'll find, who has been damaged by this.
Right.
Just like, you've seen with these PFAS personal injury cases. But really, I think the edge that we have with the current technology that's out there is that we're able to, try to find these cases before that damage has occurred, which I think is really crucial.
Right, and exactly, like because I think it's one thing to bring the litigation and get people damages after the fact, and I think, like you said, like the real value is being able to detect these trends beforehand, before it becomes litigation and before it harms so many people. I feel like that's really the value that we can bring here, is if that we're seeing these trends and we're able to detect them beforehand, and we're like, wait, something's going on here. Let's actually have these polluting entities stop doing what they're doing, and not necessarily through the court system after the fact, but proactively, so
Yeah.
that people aren't injured. I think like really I see the future as moving in that direction.
Definitely. I mean, I think just, we're using the data that we have, we can get these sort of signals of, hotspots, areas where we see that there's significant contamination and that based on our analysis, we see that there's going to be significant risk in this place.
Right.
And we can, bring that to light and notify these people. Once we have, the geographic analysis of where this is happening, we can really reach out to these people and make sure not only that they know, but that they take action. So preventative action, they can seek out damages. There's a lot that can be done with the data that's out there if you're analyzing it correctly.
Right. And of course, when it does turn into a lawsuit, we at Darrow we have certain capabilities that allow us to find the relevant plaintiffs that might be impacted, right? Because as we mentioned earlier, there's people who are affected and they might not even know what the cause was. So when you basically advertise these kinds of claims, that it's almost like you have to do an awareness campaign. It's
Mhm.
not obvious that I live here, drink this water, and have kidney cancer, right? You have to kind of put that together in their mind so that they can know they can reach out to us. And so there's a lot of different campaigns that we run with a lot of different language, digital means mostly, and so that people can kind of connect those things. And we have a lot of capabilities to really, focus on people in certain areas and that have certain injuries potentially, and certain demographic information that we use to really find the right people and help them realize that they might have a claim. So I think that's really another element here that's kind of worth covering as well.
And by the way, that's where, some of the scientific expertise comes in, and like the epidemiological studies, the environmental engineering aspect, and the modeling that goes into this. Once again, we found the contamination. We're aiming, we're advertising to the right people according to their geolocation. We really want to make sure we're asking them the right questions to identify the causation story here. We want to
Right.
understand, we want to get their full story on exposure, and make sure that the people that we're talking to are really the people who were affected and not, people who contracted whatever illnesses for other reasons.
Right, exactly. Because you can have kidney cancer, right? It's just because you have kidney cancer or something doesn't mean you are affected by PFAS. Right. To differentiate between that is key.
Yeah.
Um, and I know we had some questions that came in here. Let me just I'm gonna pull this up. Okay, should I just read them? I can read the
Yeah, go
questions.
ahead.
All right, okay, so I'll read this first one. Looking ahead, what do you see as the next chapter for PFAS and water contamination litigation? And how might advances in technology or regulation accelerate accountability? I don't know if you want to take that one.
Yeah. Okay. So I think in terms of PFAS, I think that the MDL has mostly covered everything that has to do with the AFFF. So I don't think we're going to see, much more of that. What I do think we're going to see is more local PFAS cases. And again, I've said before, that there is a challenge here just with the abundance of data. Causation is maybe harder to prove, but
Right.
it's definitely possible. And I do think we're going to see more cases like that. But I also think we're going to see more contamination cases coming up and just more trends. I was just at MTMP. There were lots of conversations about 1,4-dioxane. There was PCE, TCE, all kinds of chemicals that I think as time goes on, we get more research on how they actually how they impact people's health and the extent of that. And so I think there's going to be more cases like this, especially with how the MDL has been run so effectively. I think that's really going to be a precedent for more cases out there.
Right. And I think, to the accountability question, I mean, I think it will accelerate accountability because maybe us, in the plaintiff's world being so proactive and looking at these chemicals will spark more of an interest in the defendants to do some more serious, not even before the defendants, right? Just companies in general to do more serious testing and really make sure that the products that they're using and what they're emitting into our atmosphere and into the waters is safe for people, right? And I think that's like, that they might see, wait a second, I don't want to spend billions of dollars on a lawsuit. Maybe we should just spend a little more time and do a little bit more research, spend a little bit more money on the research and testing to make sure this doesn't happen, right? I think it's almost like the economic incentive for them is to make sure that they do their due diligence. So then we end up having a situation where this is prevented in the first place,
Yeah.
right?
And I think, litigation like this has really brought, environmental awareness to the forefront. And you can see it across the market. So you have clothing companies making statements about, what's in their clothes and all these big industries and chemical manufacturers even, clarifying to the public that what they're doing is clean.
Right.
I think they've really understood the importance of that. And yeah, I hope, we're going to be able to be more proactive, and try to avoid these situations to begin with.
Right. And yeah, I think we maybe have time for like another question or two.
Mhm.
I can read this one. Hold on one second. Let me pull it up. Okay, let me take this one. What are some of the biggest challenges you face in the work that you do? And on the flip side, what are the most rewarding what's the most rewarding part of seeing a potential violation turn into a case that could drive real world change? What do you think?
So I touched on this earlier. I think one of the challenges, I mean, with all these cases, all torts cases, the biggest challenge is obviously causation. And so again, with like the abundance of data that's out there, that sometimes makes it harder to prove. Um, but it does mean that, especially compared to like what 20 years ago, when we come to court with a case, we have a very high standard, and we're going to rule out all these other external possibilities that could have caused whatever damage. So I think that's a major like substantive challenge in these cases. I think another challenge is, finding the right partners to lead these cases. They are
Right.
so complex, and just so, they require so much capacity from these firms, so much investment. So I think that's also, a major challenge with these cases.
Right. And of course, because it costs money to get experts. And I think, it's easy to go for an MDL case that's like straightforward.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes in a toxic case, like you said, the causation is more involved. You have to have more expertise. And I think, those are much more challenging. But I think in some ways, because they're so challenging, those who are willing to do them and put in the time and effort, it's very rewarding because you're able to have such real world change. I mean, imagine, the team that initially uncovered PFAS. I'm sure a lot of people said this is crazy. We're not gonna, pursue this, right? But they kept persevering, and look how much good it's brought that we're able to bring this to the surface. I think the challenge for me is also like related to working with partners that can like do this kind of work and use the data and technology. I think that's definitely a challenge. There's also the challenge of obtaining the evidence, right? There's other cases where all you need is some statement or one medical record, but here like proving where people lived and their address and all their medical history, and it's just much more complicated. So I think at Darrow, we try not to shy away from the complex problems because data can help. And if you have, capable people, it also can help. But I think it really makes it when you're doing something that complicated and really having an impact and able to and are able to solve the problem. I think that really does drive real world change and has a net benefit to society in general. So something
Yeah,
that
I
I
mean, I
think.
think I've been at the company for 5 years. These are the types of cases that we were dreaming of when we started Darrow. Every lawyer wants to be the Aaron Brockovich of the world, to
Mhm.
uncover the next, cluster, help these people. There's just so much, I think, my team is so passionate about these cases. Everyone at Darrow is. A lot of work is put into them. We really want to see them, get to court. And we want to, there's so much reward in seeing that compensation, meeting these victims, uncovering their stories. Um, yeah, it is a very, very rewarding domain for sure.
Sure. No, and I think I know we're just about at time here with this webinar, but we really appreciate everyone who joined and asked questions and listened. Thank you. I hope that you found it interesting. And if you want to work with Darrow in the toxic tort domain, we're available. Please reach out to us if you have an idea or if you're interested in a particular litigation, or if you just want to explore some of the things that we have to offer. You can always reach out to us. You can email contact@darrow.ai. Or you can even email us individually. My email is Serge dot Zenin at Darrow.ai. Um, I-
Mine is Meori.Elias at Darrow AI.
yeah, so
Feel free to reach
hopefully,
out.
yeah, please reach out and thanks for joining us today and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.